She faked being asleep at the bridal shower when her best friend started talking. I'm pregnant, and it's not the groom's. It's her husband's. She'll never know. What she did with that recording shocked everyone. I'm pregnant. That's amazing, Val. Does Dane know? There was a pause. A long, suffocating pause that seemed to stretch across the expensive loft like a crack splitting through ice. It's not Dane's baby. What do you mean? Val, what did you do? It's Fletcher's. Fletcher? As in Bree's Fletcher? Valentina, please tell me you're kidding. I wish I were. It happened 2 months ago. That weekend Bree went to Phoenix for her grandmother's funeral. Fletcher was devastated about losing the baby, their third loss, and Bree had asked me to check on him. I brought over dinner and wine, and we were both so broken about different things, and it just happened. Once. 3 times that weekend. And twice more after that. Those words. Those devastating, life-shattering words were being spoken just 15 feet away from where Brielle Montgomery lay frozen on an ivory sectional, pretending to be asleep. Her heart hammered so violently against her ribs that she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. But she kept her breathing slow and steady, the performance of her life, while her entire world disintegrated around her. Her phone was tucked into the pocket of her dress, and she could feel it pressing against her hip. The voice memo app was recording. The little red light was blinking in the darkness of her pocket. 43 minutes of confession. 43 minutes that would change everything. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that the idea of their betrayal seemed impossible? Have you ever loved 2 people so deeply that discovering they destroyed you together felt like being torn in half? What would you do if your best friend confessed to carrying your husband's baby while you lay there, silent, recording every word? Most people would have jumped up screaming. Some would have confronted them right there, played the recording, watched them squirm. Others would have posted it online for the world to hear, burned their lives down with the click of a button. But what Brielle did, no one saw it coming. This is a story about betrayal, yes. But it's also about a choice that will make you question everything you think you know about strength, forgiveness, and what it really means to build a family. If you've ever felt that gut punch of betrayal, if you've ever had to choose between revenge and something far more complicated, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you're ready for a story that will change how you think about forgiveness, stay with me. Say I'm with you, Mr. Hearthline, in the comments, because by the end of this story, you'll understand why the most powerful thing you can do isn't always the most obvious. Let me take you back to where it all began, to the moment before everything shattered, to a perfect afternoon in Denver that was about to become a nightmare. The velvet cushion felt soft against Brielle's cheek as she lay on Valentina's cream-colored sectional. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the downtown Denver loft, casting geometric shadows across the hardwood floors. Confetti lay scattered everywhere, rose gold and blush pink, catching the light like tiny mirrors. Champagne corks were strewn near the kitchen area. The scent of peonies hung thick in the air, sweet and almost overwhelming. It had been a perfect day, exactly what Valentina had dreamed of. Brielle had made sure of that. For the past 6 hours, she had orchestrated every detail of her best friend's bridal shower with the precision of a military operation. 40 guests, all of whom had been greeted with personalized champagne flutes. 3 different dessert stations, each one carefully curated to match Valentina's Pinterest board. A playlist of songs from their college days that had everyone singing along. Photo opportunities at every corner, with backdrops Brielle had driven to 3 different craft stores to find. Her feet ached in her stilettos. Designer shoes that she'd bought specifically for this event because Valentina had mentioned, months ago, that she wanted everyone to look elegant. Brielle's dress was blush pink to match the color scheme. Her hair was professionally styled. Her makeup was perfect. Everything about her appearance screamed put together, successful, happy. No one looking at her would have guessed that just 3 weeks ago, she'd spent an entire night sobbing on her bathroom floor after getting her period. Another month. Another failure. Another reminder that her body couldn't do the one thing she wanted most in the world. No one would have known that 2 months ago, she'd had her 3rd miscarriage. That she'd been 12 weeks along that time, far enough to have hope, close enough to the 2nd trimester to start believing maybe this time would be different. That she'd felt the cramping start while she was at work, had driven herself to the hospital, had called Fletcher in a panic, and had lost the baby before he even made it to her room. No one at this shower, looking at Brielle's bright smile and efficient coordination, would have suspected that her marriage was hanging by a thread, that she and Fletcher barely touched anymore, that they'd stopped talking about trying again because the grief was too heavy, the disappointment too crushing, the medical bills too overwhelming. She'd pushed all of that aside today. Today was about Valentina, her best friend of 10 years, the woman who had held her through every one of those losses, who had brought her meals when she couldn't get out of bed, who had listened to her cry about the unfairness of it all, about the women who got pregnant accidentally while Brielle couldn't stay pregnant on purpose. Valentina deserved a perfect day, and Brielle had given her one. She had only meant to rest her eyes for a moment after the last guest left. Kennedy, Valentina's older sister, had offered to help with cleanup. Brielle had been running on adrenaline and caffeine for hours, and suddenly the exhaustion hit her all at once. The sectional was right there, soft and inviting. Just 5 minutes, she'd thought. Just long enough to take the weight off her feet. She'd pulled out her phone, thinking she'd listen to one of those meditation podcasts her therapist had recommended, the ones that were supposed to help with anxiety and grief. Her fingers had been clumsy with fatigue, and instead of opening the podcast app, she'd accidentally activated the voice memo function. The red recording light had started blinking. She'd been about to turn it off when she heard Valentina's voice from the kitchen area. She's finally passed out. Brielle had frozen, her thumb hovering over the stop button. I thought Brie would never stop fussing over every little thing today. Girl, you know how she is. Always trying to be the perfect friend, the perfect daughter, the perfect everything. It's exhausting just watching her. The words had hit Brielle like a slap. Her stomach had dropped. But she'd stayed perfectly still, something instinctive telling her to listen, to stay quiet, to hear what came next. I love her. I really do. But sometimes I feel like I can't breathe around her anymore. She's been planning this wedding like it's her own. Did you see how she practically took over when those yellow flowers arrived instead of the peach ones? I specifically told the florist peach, but they sent yellow, and Brie spent 20 minutes on the phone making them send someone back with the right color. Brielle remembered that moment differently. She'd thought Valentina would be upset about the flowers. She'd thought she was helping, making sure everything was perfect. And the way she kept checking her little notebook every 5 minutes, making sure everything was exactly how I wanted it. Like, relax, girl. It's just a shower. That little notebook had taken Brielle weeks to put together. She'd written down every detail Valentina had mentioned wanting, from the specific shade of pink napkins to the exact brand of champagne Valentina's mother had served at her own bridal shower 30 years ago. She'd thought she was being thoughtful, being the best maid of honor possible. Lying on that couch, Brielle had made a split-second decision. She'd let the recording continue. And she'd closed her eyes, regulated her breathing, and pretended to be deeply asleep. That decision had changed everything. Because what came next, the conversation that followed, was something Brielle could never have prepared for. Not in her worst nightmares. Not in her darkest moments of paranoia. The thing is, Valentina's voice had dropped lower, forcing Brielle to strain to hear, I feel guilty every single day. Guilty about what? The pause that followed felt endless. Brielle had felt her entire body tense, some primal instinct screaming that whatever came next would be bad. She'd focused on keeping her breathing even, on not moving, on maintaining the illusion of sleep. I'm pregnant. Those 2 words had landed in the quiet loft like a bomb. Brielle's mind had raced with confusion. Pregnant? Valentina was pregnant? Why was this being whispered like a secret? Why hadn't she told Brielle? They told each other everything. Valentina had been there for all 3 of Brielle's miscarriages. Surely she would have shared news about her own pregnancy, especially knowing how much Brielle had been struggling. Oh my God, Val. That's amazing. Does Dane know? Kennedy's voice had been full of genuine excitement, the kind of joy you'd expect when hearing pregnancy news about your sister. But there had been something else there too, something Brielle couldn't quite identify. Confusion, maybe. Or concern. Another pause. This one even longer. Brielle had felt her heartbeat accelerating. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. It's not Dane's baby. The world had tilted on its axis. Brielle had bitten down hard on her tongue to keep from gasping. The metallic taste of blood had filled her mouth. Not Dane's baby. Valentina was pregnant, and the baby wasn't her fiancé's. The man she was supposed to marry in 6 weeks. The man who had proposed on a ski lift in Aspen, who had cried when she said yes, who had been planning this wedding with the kind of enthusiasm most men reserved for sports. What do you mean? Kennedy's shock had been evident even in a whisper. Val, what did you do? It's Fletcher's. 2 words. Just 2 words. But they had contained enough destructive power to obliterate everything Bridal thought she knew about her life. Fletcher. Her husband of 5 years. The man who had held her hand through 3 miscarriages. The man who kissed her forehead every morning and told her they would be okay, even when the doctors said her chances of carrying to term were almost non-existent. The man who was supposed to be at a medical conference in Seattle this weekend. Bridal had felt the room spinning, even though she was lying perfectly still. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of cruel joke. Maybe she'd heard wrong. Maybe Kennedy had said a different name, and Bridal's exhausted brain had twisted it into Fletcher. Fletcher? As in Bree's Fletcher? No, she'd heard correctly. Valentina, please tell me you're kidding. I wish I were. The crack in Valentina's voice had been genuine. Real emotion, real pain. But Bridal had felt no sympathy. Only a cold, spreading horror that was quickly turning into rage. It happened 2 months ago. 2 months. Bridal's mind had immediately calculated. 2 months ago, she'd been in Phoenix. Her grandmother had died. The woman who had raised her after her parents' divorce, who had taught her to bake and garden and believe in true love. She'd been gone for 5 days, handling funeral arrangements, supporting her mother, grieving the loss of her Nana, while still processing the loss of her 3rd baby just weeks before. That weekend, Bree went to Phoenix for her grandmother's funeral. There it was. Confirmation. While Bridal had been sobbing over her grandmother's casket, mourning both her Nana and the baby she'd lost, her husband and her best friend had been together. Fletcher was devastated about losing the baby, their 3rd loss, and Bree had asked me to check on him. That was true. Bridal had called Valentina from the airport, her voice thick with tears, asking if she could bring Fletcher some dinner. He'd seemed so broken, so distant. She'd been worried about leaving him alone. She'd trusted Valentina to take care of him. I brought over dinner and wine, and we were both so broken about different things, and it just happened. Just happened. As if it were an accident. As if you could trip and fall into infidelity. Once. Kennedy's question had been sharp, prosecutorial. Bridal had loved her in that moment for asking the question she needed answered. 3 times that weekend. 3 times. While Bridal had been selecting a casket for her grandmother. While she'd been writing a eulogy. While she'd been holding her mother as she fell apart. Fletcher and Valentina had been together. Not once in a moment of weakness, but 3 times. Deliberate. Repeated. And twice more after that. Bridal had felt bile rise in her throat. Twice more. After that weekend. After Bridal had come home and fallen into Fletcher's arms, thanking him for being her rock, for being the one solid thing in her life. He'd held her, stroked her hair, told her they would get through this together. And all the while, he'd been sleeping with her best friend. The tears had started then, silent and hot, sliding down Bridal's face onto the velvet cushion. She'd been grateful for the way she was positioned, her face partially hidden, her body language relaxed despite the tension screaming through every muscle. Does Fletcher know you're pregnant? No. And he can't know. I broke it off 2 weeks ago. Told him it was a mistake, that I loved Dane, that we could never speak of it again. He agreed. He doesn't want to lose Bree. He doesn't want to lose Bree. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like another betrayal. Fletcher had chosen to end the affair not because he loved Bridal, not because he regretted what he'd done, but because he didn't want to lose her. Like she was a possession, a convenience, something to be kept rather than cherished. So you're just going to pass this baby off as Dane's? The timing works. Dane and we've been together. He'll never question it. Valentina's voice had been so calm, so matter-of-fact. She'd clearly thought this through, had a plan, had calculated the dates and the odds, and decided she could pull it off. And Bridal had held her breath. She'll never know. Those 3 words had been delivered with such certainty, such confidence. Valentina had been so sure that she could keep this secret, that Bridal would go through life never knowing that her best friend had betrayed her, never knowing that her husband had given Valentina the one thing Bridal wanted most, a baby. She's already so broken about not being able to have children. Finding out about this would destroy her completely. It's actually kinder this way. She gets to keep her marriage, her best friend, and her dignity. I get to have the baby I want with the man I'm supposed to marry. Everyone wins. The cruelty of the logic had been breathtaking. Valentina had convinced herself that the lies were mercy, that letting Bridal live in ignorance was somehow doing her a favor. Except it's built on a lie. And that baby is going to be Bree's husband's child. That's God. Val, that's sociopathic. Kennedy's horror had been clear. At least one person in this conversation understood how wrong this was. Don't judge me. You don't know what it's like to be in love with someone you can't have. And there it was. The confession that had made everything even worse. You're in love with Fletcher? Bridal had felt her heart shatter into even smaller pieces. She hadn't known that was possible. She'd thought the initial revelation was the worst of it. But this was a different kind of pain. I have been for years. Since before Bree even met him, actually. Years. Valentina had been in love with Fletcher for years. How many moments of their friendship had been a lie? How many times had Valentina smiled at Bridal and Fletcher together while secretly wishing she were in Bridal's place? We were all at that conference in Austin, remember? And I introduced them because I thought it would just be a casual thing. I never imagined she'd marry him. Bridal remembered that conference. 7 years ago. She'd been 25, fresh out of graduate school, attending her first professional marketing conference. Valentina had been there representing her PR firm. She'd introduced Bridal to Fletcher at the hotel bar, mentioning that he was a resident at Denver General, that he was smart and funny and single. Bridal had thought Valentina was being a good friend, playing matchmaker. She'd never suspected that Valentina wanted Fletcher for herself. And then watching them together, watching him love her, watching them try so desperately for a baby while I wanted him to look at me the way he looked at her. Bridal had thought Fletcher looked at her with love. Now she wondered if he'd ever looked at her the way he looked at Valentina. If the passion she'd thought they shared had been real or imagined. So you seduced him when he was at his most vulnerable? Kennedy's voice had been cold with judgment. It wasn't like that. It was mutual. He wanted me to. He told me I understood him in ways Bree couldn't. That with me. He didn't feel like a failure. Each word had been another stab wound. Fletcher felt like a failure with her. With Bridal. Because she couldn't carry a baby. Because her body kept rejecting the pregnancies they created together. And instead of talking to her about it, instead of working through it together, he'd turned to Valentina. What are you going to do when the baby is born and it looks like Fletcher? You can't possibly think you'll get away with this. Dane has dark hair and eyes. Fletcher has dark hair and eyes. And honestly, even if there's a resemblance, no one will ever suspect. Why would they? Bree trusts me completely. She trusts Fletcher completely. Their marriage might be failing because of the infertility struggles, but they'd never suspect betrayal like this. Their marriage was failing. Bridal had known things were hard, but she'd thought they were fighting for each other. She'd thought the distance was grief, not disconnection. She'd never suspected that Fletcher had given up on them. This is going to blow up in your face. Secrets like this always come out. Not if we're careful. And we will be. Fletcher loves Bridal too much to risk losing her. And I love my life too much to risk losing Dane. This secret stays between us. The baby will be born, everyone will celebrate, and life will go on. Valentina had paused, and when she spoke again, there had been something almost tender in her voice. Bree will probably volunteer to babysit constantly, knowing her. She'll get to have some version of motherhood
Leaving
through
it
my
was
child,
just her best friend's
and she'll
baby.
never know
The
she's
manipulation
actually
of
caring
it.
for Fletcher's
The calculated cruelty.
That had been the moment
I need
when
you to
something
promise me you
inside
won't tell
Bridal
anyone.
had fundamentally
Especially
changed.
not Bree.
She's
The
fragile
idea
right
that
now.
Valentina
This
had
would
thought
break
of
her,
this,
and I couldn't
planned
live
for
with that
Brielle's
guilt on
pain
top of
and
everything
longing
else.
to be weaponized,
You're already
to
living
be
with
used.
it. But that she would let Bridal
I won't
care
tell
for
her,
Fletcher's child
because you're
while
right.
it would destroy her. But Val, I don't know if I can look at you the same way after this. You don't have to look at me anyway. You just have to keep your mouth shut. Footsteps had approached the living area. Bridal had quickly adjusted her breathing, making sure it was deep and even. She'd felt someone stop beside the couch. A moment later, a soft throw blanket had been draped over her body. She looks so peaceful when she sleeps. Like all her sadness just disappears. Valentina's voice had been soft, almost loving. The tenderness of the gesture, while knowing what Bridal now knew, had made her want to scream. To jump up and claw at Valentina's face. To play the recording right there and watch her try to explain. But she'd stayed still, stayed silent. Let the recording continue. You're really good at pretending to care about her. Kennedy's disgust had been evident. I do care about her. That's what makes this so complicated. The footsteps had moved away. Brielle had lain there for another 10 minutes, listening to the sounds of cleanup. Dishes being washed. Decorations being taken down. Casual conversation about the weather, about Kennedy's flight back to Boston the next day, about whether the caterer had left enough food. Normal conversation. As if Valentina hadn't just confessed to the most devastating betrayal imaginable. Finally, Brielle had allowed herself to stir. She'd stretched slowly, made a small sound like someone waking naturally, and opened her eyes. The late afternoon light was softer now, golden hour casting everything in a warm glow that felt obscene given what she'd just learned. Valentina had appeared almost immediately, her face warm and smiling. Hey, sleepyhead. You crashed hard. Must have been exhausted from all your running around today. Brielle had looked at her best friend. The woman who was carrying her husband's child. The woman who had been sleeping with Fletcher while Brielle mourned. And she'd felt something cold and hard settle in her chest where love and trust used to live. Yeah, I guess I needed the rest. Her voice had sounded normal to her own ears. Calm. Friendly. The performance was holding. You want some leftover champagne? We're just finishing cleanup. No, I think I'm going to head home. Fletcher should be back from Seattle tonight, and I want to be there when he arrives. That was a lie. Fletcher wasn't due back until tomorrow. But Brielle had needed to get out of there before she broke down completely. She'd watched Valentina's face carefully and had seen it. Just the smallest flicker of something. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. But then the smile had returned, bright and false. Of course. Give him my love. The audacity of that statement. Give him my love. When Valentina had already given Fletcher everything. I will. Brielle had gathered her purse and the empty casserole dish she'd brought. She'd said goodbye to Kennedy, whose eyes had held knowledge and pity in equal measure. And then she'd walked out of the loft, down the elevator, across the parking garage to her car. She'd sat in her Honda Civic for several minutes before starting the engine. Her hands had been shaking. Her whole body had been shaking. She'd pulled out her phone and stopped the recording. 43 minutes and 17 seconds. She had 43 minutes of confession, of betrayal, of calculated cruelty. Evidence that was irrefutable and damning. Her phone had buzzed with a text from her mother. How was the shower, sweetheart? I'm sure you made it beautiful for Valentina. Brielle had stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back. It was perfect, Mom. Just perfect. The drive home had passed in a blur. Brielle's mind had raced through everything she'd heard, cataloging details, processing implications. By the time she'd pulled into the driveway of the home she shared with Fletcher, she'd felt hollowed out. Like someone had scooped out everything essential and left only the shell. The house had been empty, quiet. All their wedding photos on the walls seemed to be mocking her now. Brielle and Fletcher on their wedding day, so young and happy and naive. Brielle and Fletcher at the beach on their honeymoon. At countless dinners and parties. Always together. Always smiling. All of it had been a lie. She'd walked through the house like a ghost, seeing everything differently now. The kitchen where she and Fletcher had cooked together. The living room where they'd talked about baby names. The bedroom where they'd made love and cried together and tried so desperately to create the family they both wanted. Except Fletcher had created a family. Just not with her. Brielle had gone to her home office and sat down at her desk. She'd connected her phone to her laptop and saved the recording in 3 different places. Cloud storage. External hard drive. Email to herself. She wasn't going to lose this evidence. Then she'd listen to it again. And again. And again. By the time the sun set, she'd heard the conversation 17 times. Each playback had revealed new layers of pain, new details she'd missed in her initial shock. The way Valentina's voice had softened when she talked about Fletcher. The casual dismissal of Brielle's feelings. The calculated nature of the deception. But she'd also heard other things. Kennedy's disgust, which meant there was at least one person who saw this for what it was. Valentina's admission that she felt guilty, which meant she wasn't completely sociopathic, just selfish and cruel. And in Fletcher's reported words, I don't want to lose Brie, there had been something. Not love, maybe, but at least attachment. At least recognition that losing her would matter. It wasn't much, but it was something. Around midnight, Brielle had started investigating. She'd called the hotel in Seattle where Fletcher's medical conference was supposedly being held. The night receptionist had been helpful, checking the registry and confirming that no one by the name of Fletcher Montgomery had checked in this weekend or any weekend in the past month. Strike one. She'd logged into their shared credit card account, something she rarely did because Fletcher handled most of their finances. She'd scrolled back 2 months to the weekend of her grandmother's funeral. And there it was. A charge for $347 at the downtown Denver Marriott. The dates matched perfectly. Strike two. She'd checked their phone records online. The detailed billing showed every call and text. She'd found hundreds of deleted text message exchanges between Fletcher's number and Valentina's number. The messages themselves were gone, deleted from both phones, but the record of their existence remained. Strike three. The evidence had been overwhelming. The betrayal had been real and documented and undeniable. And Bridal had sat in her dark office, surrounded by proof of her husband's infidelity, and had cried until she had no tears left. But here's what surprised her. Once the crying stopped, once the initial wave of devastation passed, what she'd felt wasn't rage. It was clarity. She could destroy them. She had the power to do it. One click, one post, one forwarded email, and she could ruin both their lives. Send the recording to Dane so he'd know his fiancée was pregnant with another man's child. Send it to Fletcher's medical practice. Let his colleagues know what kind of man he really was. Post it on social media. Let all their friends and family hear the truth. The revenge fantasies had been vivid and satisfying. But as Bridal had sat there in the darkness, she'd realized something. Revenge wouldn't give her what she actually needed. It wouldn't unbreak her heart. It wouldn't undo the betrayal. It wouldn't make Fletcher love her the way she deserved to be loved. It wouldn't give her the baby she so desperately wanted. All it would do was spread the pain around. Make more people hurt. Create more chaos. And Bridal was tired of hurting. She'd spent 3 years grieving lost pregnancies, 2 months grieving her grandmother. She'd been carrying so much pain for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to not hurt. So she'd made a different decision. She would confront them, yes. She would use the recording to force the truth into the light. But she wouldn't do it out of rage. She'd do it out of a need for honesty, for clarity, for the chance to make decisions based on reality instead of lies. Sunday morning had arrived with brilliant sunshine, the kind of Colorado blue sky day that belonged in tourism brochures. Bridal had barely slept, but she'd showered and dressed and made herself coffee. She'd sat at her kitchen table and had thought about what she wanted to say, how she wanted to handle this. Fletcher wasn't due home until evening. She had hours to prepare. She'd spent the morning going through old photos on her phone, scrolling back through years of friendship with Valentina and marriage to Fletcher. She'd been looking for signs she'd missed, moments that should have tipped her off, and she'd found them. There had been the time last year when she'd walked into a room and Fletcher and Valentina had been standing close together, talking in low voices. They'd stepped apart when they'd seen her, and Valentina had made some joke about convincing Fletcher to agree to a surprise party for Bridal's birthday. Bridal had thought nothing of it at the time. Now she wondered what they'd really been discussing. There had been the night 3 months ago when Fletcher had come home late, claiming he'd been at the hospital for an emergency surgery. But he'd smelled like perfume. When Bridal had mentioned it, he'd said one of the nurses had hugged him in gratitude for saving a patient. She believed him because why wouldn't she? There had been all the times Valentina had asked detailed questions about Bridal and Fletcher's relationship, how they were handling the fertility struggles, whether they were still intimate, whether Fletcher seemed happy. Bridal had thought Valentina was being a concerned friend. Now she understood it had been intelligence gathering. The signs had been there. She just hadn't wanted to see them. Around noon, Bridal had made a decision. She'd called Kennedy. The phone had rung 3 times before Valentina's sister had answered. Bridal. Hi. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Her voice had been cautious. Guilty. I know I was awake yesterday. There had been a long pause. I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you right then, but she's my sister, and I'm so sorry, Bridal. Kennedy had sounded like she'd been crying. I understand. She's your sister. But here's what I need from you. I need you to be there when I talk to Dane. I need a witness to make sure Valentina can't twist this into something it's not. You're going to tell him? He deserves to know. He deserves to know before he marries her, before he signs his name on a birth certificate for a child that isn't his. Kennedy had been quiet for a moment. Then she'd said, You're right. He does deserve to know. When? Tomorrow evening. Can you make sure he's available? Tell him I need to talk to him about something important. Don't tell Valentina. I won't. And Brielle? For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. What Valentina did, what they both did, it's unforgivable. That word, unforgivable. It had hung in the air between them. I haven't decided yet if it's unforgivable, but it definitely can't stay hidden. After the call, Brielle had felt some of the weight lift. She wasn't carrying this secret alone anymore. Kennedy knew, and soon, Dane would know, and then Fletcher would have to face what he'd done. The rest of Sunday had passed slowly. Brielle had cleaned the house, a nervous habit from childhood. When things felt out of control, clean something. Make at least one space orderly and manageable. She'd scrubbed bathrooms and vacuumed carpets and organized closets, all while her mind raced with what she would say to Fletcher. He'd arrived home around 7 that evening, walking through the door with his conference bag and a tired smile. Hey, babe. God, I missed you. Those conferences are exhausting. He'd moved to kiss her, but Brielle had stepped back. Sit down. We need to talk. She'd watched the color drain from his face, watched him realize, somehow, that this was it. The reckoning he'd probably been dreading since the affair started. Bri, I know about Valentina. For words. Simple and devastating. I know about the affair. I know about the baby. I know everything. Fletcher had collapsed into the nearest chair like his legs had given out. His face had gone from pale to gray. His hands had started shaking. Oh God. Brielle, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did. Repeatedly. For 2 months. You hurt me while I trusted you completely. How did you find out? She could have told him about the recording right then. Could have played it for him, made him listen to Valentina's confession. But she'd held back. That was her ace in the hole. She'd reveal it when the time was right. Does it matter how I found out? What matters is that it's true. You slept with my best friend while I was burying my grandmother. You gave her the baby I can't seem to carry. And you were going to let me live in ignorance while she raised your child. Each accusation had landed like a physical blow. Fletcher had flinched with every sentence. I ended it. 2 weeks ago. I told her we could never do it again. I chose you, Bri. I chose our marriage. You chose wrong. You should have chosen honesty. You should have told me the truth and let me decide if this marriage was worth saving. Is it? His voice had cracked. Is it worth saving? Brielle had looked at her husband, at the man she'd loved for 7 years, married for 5. The man who had held her hand through her graduate school finals and her first big job interview, who had proposed on the anniversary of their first date with a ring he'd saved for 6 months to afford, who had cried the first time she got pregnant, tears of joy and hope. That man felt like a stranger now. I don't know yet, but I know I can't make that decision while you're still lying to me. I'll tell you everything. Anything you want to know. She'd prepared herself for this. Had a list of questions in her mind. But there was one that mattered most. Do you love her? The silence that followed had been answer enough. But Fletcher had spoken anyway, his voice barely above a whisper. I love you both. In different ways. But Bri, you're my wife. You're the one I want to build a life with. Except she's building it instead. She's carrying your child. The child I've been desperate for. The child that's supposed to be ours. We can still have that. We can try again. The doctors said it's unlikely I'll ever carry to term. You know that. I know that. And apparently, Valentina knows that too, which is why she felt so comfortable stealing my husband while I was at my most broken. Brielle had stood then, needing distance from him, needing to not see the guilt and fear in his face because it was making her feel things she didn't want to feel. Sympathy, pity, love, even, buried under all the hurt. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen now. Tomorrow, you're going to call Dane and tell him the truth. You're going to tell him that baby isn't his. You're going to take responsibility for what you've done. Bri, that will destroy their relationship. That relationship is already destroyed. It's built on a lie. He deserves to know the truth before he marries her, before he becomes legally bound to a child that isn't his. What about us? Are you leaving me? The question had hung between them, heavy with fear and hope and desperate need. I don't know. I need time to think about whether I can forgive this, whether I even want to. But I know I can't move forward while carrying this secret for you and Valentina. The truth needs to come out. And what about you? What are you going to do? Brielle had picked up her phone from the table. The recording was still there, still saved, still waiting. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what happened. Not for revenge. but because secrets this big have a way of poisoning everything they touch. And I'm done being poisoned by other people's choices. Fletcher had started crying then. Real tears, not manipulative ones. The kind of crying that came from genuine recognition of how badly he'd destroyed something precious. I'm so sorry, Bree. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this. But honesty might help us figure out what comes next. She'd left him there in the living room and had gone to their bedroom. She'd locked the door and had called Kennedy back. Is everything set for tomorrow? Yes. Dane said he can meet at 6. I'll be there. Thank you. Brielle. What Fletcher did, what they both did, it's inexcusable. But I need you to know, I think you're handling this with incredible grace. I don't feel graceful. I feel broken. Sometimes grace looks like moving forward when you're broken. That's the hardest kind. That night, Brielle had slept in the guest room. Or tried to sleep. Mostly she'd lain awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the conversation that would happen the next day. Thinking about Dane's face when he heard the truth. Thinking about Valentina's panic when she realized her secret was out. Thinking about the baby. The innocent life at the center of all this chaos. Fletcher's child. A little person who would be born into complicated circumstances through no fault of their own. And despite everything, despite all the hurt and rage and betrayal, Brielle had felt something unexpected. A strange kind of connection to that baby. But she'd pushed that thought away. That was something to deal with later. Right now, she needed to focus on getting through the next 24 hours. Monday had arrived with clouds and the threat of rain. Appropriate weather for the day, she would help destroy 2 relationships. Brielle had gone to work, mechanically going through the motions of her job at the marketing firm. Her co-workers had asked about the bridal shower, and she'd smiled and said it had been lovely. No one had suspected that anything was wrong. At lunch, she'd sat in her car and had listened to the recording one more time, steeling herself, reminding herself why she was doing this. She's fragile right now. This would break her, and I couldn't live with that guilt on top of everything else. Valentina's words from the recording, calling Brielle fragile, deciding what Brielle could or couldn't handle, taking away her agency, her right to know the truth about her own life. That had solidified Brielle's resolve. She wasn't fragile. She was strong enough to handle the truth, strong enough to make her own decisions, strong enough to blow up her entire life if that's what it took to live authentically. At 5:30, she'd left work and had driven to the coffee shop where they'd agreed to meet. It was a neutral location, public enough to prevent a scene, but private enough for a devastating conversation. Kennedy had arrived first, her face drawn with anxiety. She'd hugged Brielle tightly. You sure you want to do this? He da? Serves to know. Dane had arrived right at 6, his handsome face confused but friendly. He'd hugged both women, ordered a coffee, and had sat down with an easy smile. So what's this about? You both sounded so serious on the phone. Brielle had looked at this kind man. This good man who had done nothing wrong except fall in love with the wrong woman. And she'd felt genuinely sad for what she was about to do to him. Dane, I have something to tell you, and it's going to be hard to hear. His smile had faded. Okay, what is it? She'd pulled out her phone, pulled up the recording, and had set it on the table between them. I'm going to play you something. It's a conversation between Valentina and Kennedy that I accidentally recorded at the bridal shower. I need you to listen to the whole thing. And I need you to know that I'm so sorry. Then she'd pressed play, and she'd watched Dane's world shatter, just like hers had. I'm pregnant, and it's not Dane's. It's Fletcher's. The recording played through the coffee shop speaker on Brielle's phone. 43 minutes of confession. 43 minutes that would change Dane's life forever. Brielle watched his face as he listened. She'd lived through this revelation herself, so she knew the stages. First came confusion, his eyebrows drawing together as he tried to make sense of what he was hearing. Then disbelief, a small shake of his head as if he could will the words to be untrue. Then understanding, the moment when the pieces clicked together and the full picture emerged. And finally, devastation. His hands had started shaking around his coffee cup. His face had gone pale, then flushed red, then pale again. Kennedy had tears streaming down her face, one hand covering her mouth. And Brielle sat perfectly still, reliving her own trauma through Dane's reaction. 3 times that weekend, and twice more after that. Dane had closed his eyes at that, his jaw clenching so hard Brielle could see the muscle jumping. I've been in love with Fletcher for years. Since before Bree even met him. A small sound had escaped Dane's throat. Something between a gasp and a sob. The baby will be born, everyone will celebrate, and life will go on. Bree will probably volunteer to babysit constantly, knowing her. She'll get to have some version of motherhood through my child, and she'll never know she's actually caring for Fletcher's baby. That was when Dane had opened his eyes. The look on his face was something Brielle would never forget. It was the look of a man watching his entire future disappear. The recording continued. Valentina's plans to deceive him. Her certainty that she could pull it off. Her dismissal of his right to know the truth about the child he would be raising. When it finally ended, the silence in the coffee shop felt deafening. Other patrons were going about their business, ordering lattes and working on laptops, completely unaware that a man's heart was being broken at the corner table. Dane stared at the phone for a long moment. Then he looked up at Brielle. Is this real? His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Yes. I'm sorry, Dane. I'm so sorry. When was this recorded? Saturday. At the bridal shower. I fell asleep on the couch, and when I woke up, they were talking in the kitchen. I stayed quiet and let my phone record. And you're sure it's them? You're sure it's Valentina and Kennedy? I'm sure. Dane turned to Kennedy, who was still crying. Did you know about this before Saturday? No. Kennedy's voice was thick with tears. I swear, Dane. I had no idea until that conversation. And I've been sick about it ever since. Why didn't you tell me then? She's my sister. I don't know what I thought. That maybe it wasn't my place. That maybe it would somehow work itself out. I was wrong. I should have told you immediately. Dane stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I need to go. I need to talk to her. Wait. Brielle pulled a USB drive from her purse. Take this. It's a copy of the recording. In case you need it. He'd taken it with shaking hands, stared at it like it was a bomb, and had shoved it in his pocket. Did Fletcher know? About the baby? According to the recording, no. Valentina said she ended the affair 2 weeks ago and never told him about the pregnancy. But he knows now? You've talked to him? Yes. Last night. I confronted him with everything. And he admitted it. All of it. He claimed he ended it because he didn't want to lose me. Like I'm something he owns instead of someone he loves. Dane had nodded slowly, processing. Thank you for telling me. I know this can't have been easy. You deserve to know. Before the wedding. Before you signed a birth certificate. Before you built your life around a lie. He'd looked at her then. Really looked at her. And she'd seen recognition in his eyes. 2 people who had been betrayed by the 2 people they trusted most. 2 people standing in the wreckage of their lives, trying to figure out what came next. What are you going to do? About Fletcher? I don't know yet. But I know I can't stay married to someone I can't trust. Dane had nodded again. Then he'd walked out of the coffee shop without another word. Kennedy and Brielle had sat in silence for a few minutes after he left. He's going to confront her tonight. I know. Do you want me to call you? After? Tell you what happens? Brielle had considered that. Part of her wanted to know every detail of Valentina's destruction. But another part, the part that was trying to protect what was left of her heart, didn't want to hear it. No. Just make sure he's okay. He's a good man. He doesn't deserve this. Neither do you. They'd hugged in the parking lot, and then Brielle had driven home. Fletcher's car had been in the driveway when she arrived. He'd been sitting in the living room, waiting for her. Did you tell him? Yes. And now he knows. He has the recording. He's going to confront Valentina. Fletcher had dropped his head into his hands. God, Bree, do you have any idea what you've done? The question had made her angry in a way she hadn't expected. What I've done. I told the truth. That's what I've done. The question is, do you have any idea what you've done? You had an affair with my best friend. You got her pregnant. You were going to let an innocent man raise your child without knowing. So don't you dare make this about me. I'm sorry. You're right. Everything's falling apart. It was already apart, Fletcher. I just pulled back the curtain so we could all see it. That evening had been tense and silent. Fletcher had tried several times to start a conversation, but Brielle had nothing left to say to him. Not yet. She'd needed time to process, to think, to figure out who she was in the aftermath of betrayal. Around 9 p.m., her phone had rung. Kennedy. He confronted her. It was bad. Tell me. Kennedy had described the scene. Dane arriving at Valentina's apartment, playing the recording. Valentina's attempts to deny it until the evidence became undeniable. Her breakdown when she realized there was no way out. No way to spin this into something forgivable. She tried to claim she was confused on the recording, that she'd been drinking, that it wasn't real. But then he asked her directly if she was pregnant with Fletcher's baby, and she couldn't lie to his face. She broke down, started crying, apologizing, begging him to understand. What did he say? He told her the engagement was off. The wedding was canceled. He said he needed to think about whether he even wanted to know her anymore, let alone marry her and raise another man's child. Is she okay? I mean, is she safe? Kennedy had paused. Physically, yes. Emotionally, I've never seen her like this. She's completely destroyed. She kept saying she'd ruined everything, that she'd lost everyone who mattered. Despite everything, Brielle had felt a pang of something. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. She knew what it felt like to have your life implode, to realize you'd lost everything that mattered. Are you staying with her tonight? Yes. I'm not leaving her alone. Thank you for letting me know. After hanging up, Brielle had felt oddly empty. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? The truth exposed. Consequences for betrayal. Justice, in a way. But it didn't feel like victory. It just felt like more loss. The next 2 days had been a blur. Brielle had gone to work, come home, existed in a strange bubble where her normal life continued while her internal world was completely shattered. Fletcher had slept in the guest room. They'd barely spoken. On Wednesday, Brielle had done something unexpected. She'd driven to Valentina's apartment. She'd sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, building up courage. Part of her wanted to scream at Valentina, to rage, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she'd caused. But another part, a quieter part, wanted something else. Understanding, maybe, or closure, or just to look Valentina in the eye and see if there was anything left of the friendship they'd shared. She'd finally walked up to the third-floor apartment and had knocked on the door. Valentina had answered looking worse than Brielle had ever seen her. Swollen eyes, no makeup, hair unwashed and pulled back in a messy bun. Still in pajamas at 3 in the afternoon. What are you doing here? The hostility in her voice had been laced with fear. I came to talk. Can I come in? Valentina had stepped aside wordlessly. The apartment, which had been Pinterest perfect just days ago, now looked like a disaster zone. Wadded tissues everywhere. Dishes piled in the sink. Wedding planning materials scattered across the coffee table like evidence of a crime. They'd sat on opposite ends of the couch, the space between them feeling like a canyon. I'm sorry. Valentina's voice had been so quiet Brielle had almost missed it. I know that doesn't mean anything. I know you hate me. I know I deserve it. But I'm so sorry, Bri. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did. You hurt me in ways I'm still discovering. But that's not why I'm here. Why are you here? Brielle had taken a breath, preparing to say something she hadn't fully processed herself. I'm here because I realized something. You're pregnant with a baby who didn't ask for any of this. A baby who is, genetically, half Fletcher's. And while I don't know if I can ever forgive you, while I don't know if our friendship can survive this, I know that baby is innocent. Valentina had stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you decide to keep the baby, and that's entirely your choice, I want to offer you something. Financial support. Medical care through Fletcher's insurance if you need it. And when the baby is born, if you want, I'd like to be involved in their life. Why would you do that? After everything I've done? The question had hung between them, heavy with disbelief and desperate hope. Because that baby is going to need love and stability, and right now, you're going to be raising them alone. Because despite everything, I spent 10 years caring about you, and pregnancy is hard and scary even under the best circumstances. And because I've wanted to be a mother for so long, and this might be the closest I ever get, that baby is genetically connected to the man I married. I can either see that as a betrayal, or I can see it as an unexpected path to something I've always wanted. Bri, I don't deserve your kindness. No, you probably don't. But the baby deserves a chance at a good life. And I deserve a chance to decide what kind of person I want to be in the face of betrayal. I can be bitter and vengeful, or I can try to find meaning in this nightmare. What had followed was the most honest conversation they'd ever had. Valentina had confessed everything. How she'd been in love with Fletcher since that conference in Austin 7 years ago. How introducing him to Brielle had been an attempt to prove to herself she didn't have feelings for him. How watching them fall in love had created a jealousy that had poisoned her even as she genuinely cared for Brielle. She'd admitted that every bridal shower detail Brielle had planned, every thoughtful gesture, had made her feel guiltier, that the affair had started as comfort and had turned into something she'd convinced herself was love, that the pregnancy had terrified her, that losing Dane had made her realize she'd destroyed her life for a fantasy that was never real. I told myself I loved Fletcher, but I think I was just in love with the idea of taking something that was yours. Like if I could have him, it would prove I was better than you. Prettier, more desirable, less broken. That admission had hurt in a different way. Understanding that Valentina's betrayal had been driven by insecurity and competition made it somehow worse. I never thought of us as being in competition. I know. That's what made it worse. You just loved me as your friend, and I couldn't stop comparing myself to you. Your successful marriage when I couldn't keep a relationship. Your career achievements. Even your grief over the miscarriages felt like something I couldn't compete with. This deep pain that made you more sympathetic, more deserving of comfort. So you slept with my husband to even the score? I slept with your husband because I'm selfish and weak and I wanted to feel chosen for once. And I'm so sorry. They'd talk for hours. About the betrayal. About their friendship, the real moments and the false ones. About the baby and what came next. Brielle had laid out clear boundaries. This wouldn't be their old friendship. They wouldn't have casual coffee dates or girls' nights. But they could build something new. Something honest. Structured interactions focused on the baby's well-being. Therapy sessions together to process the damage. Accountability for the past, while working towards something healthier. Are you staying with Fletcher? The question had been tentative, like Valentina was afraid to know the answer. No. We're getting divorced. The trust is too broken. But that's separate from the baby situation. Does he know you're here? No. This isn't about him. This is about me choosing how I move forward. When Brielle had left that afternoon, something had shifted. Not forgiveness exactly, but the beginning of something. A path forward that didn't involve destruction. Over the next weeks, Brielle and Fletcher had gone to marriage counseling. They'd had raw, painful conversations about their relationship. About how his infidelity was unforgivable, yes, but also about how they'd both contributed to the breakdown of their marriage. How Brielle had shut down emotionally after each miscarriage, pushing Fletcher away when he'd tried to help. How Fletcher had felt like a failure every time her body rejected a pregnancy, like his inability to fix it meant he was inadequate. How they'd stopped really talking to each other, stopped being partners, had become two people living in the same house, but existing in separate grief bubbles. The therapist had been careful to clarify that none of that excused the affair. Fletcher's choice to betray Brielle was his alone. But understanding the context helped Brielle see that their marriage had been dying long before Valentina entered the picture. I think I've known for months that we weren't going to make it. Fletcher had said this during one session, tears streaming down his face. I just didn't want to admit it. Losing you felt like another failure, another thing I couldn't fix. So you had an affair instead of being honest with me? I know it doesn't make sense. I know I should have talked to you. But I was drowning, Brie. Drowning in grief and guilt, and this feeling that I was destroying you by not being able to give you a baby. And Valentina, she didn't know me as the guy who kept losing pregnancies. With her, I could be someone else. Someone who wasn't failing at the most important thing. The honesty had been brutal, but necessary. And by the sixth counseling session, they'd both acknowledged what they'd been avoiding. Their marriage was over. The divorce had been surprisingly amicable. They'd divided assets fairly, agreed on terms. Fletcher had committed to being financially responsible for the baby, even though Valentina hadn't asked for anything. And they'd agreed to maintain civility for the sake of the complicated family structure they were about to create. During this same period, Brielle had started seeing her own therapist, processing not just the betrayal, but her identity outside of being a wife and best friend. She'd realized she'd defined herself entirely by her relationships. Wife to Fletcher, best friend to Valentina, daughter to her mother, marketing executive at her firm. But who was she stripped of all those roles? The therapy had been hard work, unpacking her need to be perfect, to be needed, to earn love through service. Understanding that her worth wasn't tied to her fertility or her ability to maintain relationships. Learning that sometimes loving yourself meant making choices that other people didn't understand. She'd also started dating again, tentatively. Nothing serious at first, just coffee dates and dinners, relearning how to be single after 7 years with Fletcher. And then she'd met Rowan. Rowan had been different from anyone Brielle had ever dated. A woman, for one thing, which had surprised Brielle until it didn't. Rowan was a landscape architect with kind eyes and steady hands. She'd been honest from the start about wanting to know all of Brielle's baggage, all her complications, before deciding if they were compatible. Brielle had told her everything. The miscarriages, the betrayal, the recording, the decision to be involved in Fletcher's baby's life. She'd expected Rowan to run. Instead, Rowan had said something that changed everything. You know what I see when I look at you? Someone who got knocked down by life and decided to get back up in a completely unexpected way. You're not a victim, Brielle. You're someone who chose grace when the world expected you to choose revenge. That's incredibly brave. They'd started slowly. Brielle wasn't ready to jump into anything serious. But Rowan had been patient, supportive, present in a way that felt completely different from her relationship with Fletcher. With Rowan, Brielle didn't have to perform or be perfect or earn affection. She could just be herself, messy and healing and figuring things out. Meanwhile, Valentina's pregnancy had progressed. Brielle had gone to doctor's appointments with her, not as a friend, but as a support person. They'd seen the ultrasound together, heard the heartbeat, found out it was a girl. Fletcher had wanted to be involved, but Valentina had been clear. He could be the father, could be financially responsible, could have visitation. But they weren't going to play happy family. She didn't love him. She probably never had. And she was going to raise this baby with honesty, not fantasy. Dane had cut off all contact with Valentina. Kennedy had reported that he was devastated but healing. He'd started therapy, was focusing on work, had told Kennedy to tell Valentina that he hoped she'd be a good mother, but he wanted nothing to do with her ever again. That had hurt Valentina in a way Brielle could see. Losing Dane had been losing the life she'd wanted, the respectability, the future she'd planned. The affair had cost her everything. Her fiancé, her best friend, at least in the way they'd stripped away before. All her pretense. Her reputation among their who emerged from the wreckage was who'd heard various versions of what happened. She'd stopped but performing. It had. Stopped trying to be perfect. Started doing the hard work of figuring out who she was and why she'd made such destructive choices. I need to pause here and ask you something. Because what's about to happen in this story might not make sense unless you really understand something important. Brielle could have chosen revenge. She had every right to destroy Valentina and Fletcher, to walk away, to let them deal with the consequences alone. Most people would have. Most people would say she should have. But here's what I've learned from this story. Strength isn't always about being hard and unforgiving. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose a different path entirely. If this story is making you feel something, anger, confusion, hope, whatever it is, I need you to share it. Click that share button because someone in your life needs to hear this message. And drop a comment telling me, is Brielle being strong or foolish? Is this forgiveness or something else? Let me know where you're watching from, or just say I'm with you, Mr. Hearthline, because we're about to see how this impossible choice transforms everyone involved. 7 months into the pregnancy, Valentina had gone into early labor. Brielle had gotten the call at 2 in the morning. Kennedy's voice, panicked and scared. The baby was coming 5 weeks early. They were at Denver General. Could Brielle come? She'd thrown on clothes and had driven to the hospital in a daze. Rowan had offered to come, but Brielle had needed to do this alone. Or as alone as you could be when walking into a delivery room for someone else's baby that was also, genetically, half your ex-husband's child. The maternity ward had been quiet at that hour. Brielle had found Valentina's room and had paused outside, hearing her crying. Not pain crying, fear crying. She'd pushed open the door. Valentina had been alone, hooked up to monitors, tears streaming down her face. Where's Kennedy? Getting coffee. I told her I was fine, but I'm not. I'm terrified, Bri. She's coming too early, and I'm alone, and I don't know if I can do this. You're not alone. I'm here. Why? After everything, why are you here? Because I told you I would be. And I keep my promises. Brielle had stayed through the entire labor. 16 hours of contractions and fear and medical interventions. Fletcher had shown up around hour 8, but Valentina had asked him to wait outside. She'd wanted Brielle there instead. The moment when Hadley was born, 5 pounds 3 ounces of squalling, perfect humanity, had been transcendent. Brielle had been the first one to hold her after the nurses cleaned her up. This tiny girl with dark hair and eyes that were unmistakably Fletcher's. This child born of betrayal and pain and complicated adult mistakes. And Brielle had felt it. That overwhelming rush of love that people talked about. That instant, fierce, protective devotion that made no logical sense but was completely undeniable. She's perfect, Brielle had whispered, tears running down her face. Valentina, she's absolutely perfect. Do you want to? Would you? Valentina's voice had been weak from exhaustion. Will you be her godmother? Not just a name, but really. Will you help me raise her? Yes. The answer had come without hesitation. Yes, I will. Fletcher had come and then, had held his daughter for the first time, had cried tears that were equal parts joy and grief and guilt. He'd looked at Brielle holding the baby he'd created with her best friend, and something unspoken had passed between them. Acknowledgement that this was their new reality. Broken and bizarre and somehow beautiful. The first weeks of Hadley's life had been chaotic. Valentina had struggled with postpartum depression. Brielle had taken time off work to help, showing up every day to assist with feedings and diaper changes and the 1,000 small tasks that came with a newborn. Fletcher had visited regularly, awkward and unsure of his role. He was the father, yes, but what did that mean when the mother didn't love him, when his ex-wife was more involved in the baby's care than he was? They'd figured it out slowly, created a co-parenting arrangement that was unconventional but functional. Valentina had primary custody. Fletcher had visitation twice a week and every other weekend. And Brielle, who had no legal right to the child, was there constantly. Auntie Brie, they'd started calling her. Though everyone knew she was more than that, Rowan had been amazing through all of it. She'd shown up with meals for Valentina, had helped Brielle process the complicated emotions of loving a child that wasn't hers but kind of was, had never once made Brielle choose between their relationship and this unexpected family. When Hadley was 3 months old, Brielle and Rowan had made their relationship official. It had felt right in a way nothing had felt right in years. This woman who supported Brielle's choices even when they were complicated, who understood that family could look different than traditional structures, who loved Brielle not despite her messiness, but because of her willingness to wade into hard things with grace. The divorce from Fletcher had been finalized when Hadley was 6 months old. It had been sad but not devastating. They'd said goodbye to their marriage with honesty and mutual acknowledgement that they'd both failed it in different ways. Around that same time, Valentina had started dating again. Nothing serious, just testing the waters. She'd been upfront with potential partners about her situation. Single mom. Baby daddy was her ex-best friend's ex-husband. Said ex-best friend was heavily involved in raising the baby. Most people had run. The ones who stayed were either incredibly secure or slightly insane. But slowly, Valentina had rebuilt her life. She'd gone back to work part-time, had started therapy, had joined a single mother's support group, had learned to be a mother without the partner she'd thought she'd have. And the relationship between her and Brielle had evolved into something neither of them could have predicted. Not friends in the old way, but family of a sort. Bound together by Hadley and by the work they'd done to process the past. They'd had brutally honest conversations about jealousy and betrayal and the ways they'd both failed each other, about forgiveness and whether it was possible or even necessary, about building something new from the wreckage of what they'd destroyed. One night, when Hadley was 8 months old, they'd been sitting on Valentina's couch while the baby slept. Valentina had asked the question that had been hanging between them. Do you forgive me? Brielle had thought about it for a long time before answering. I don't know if forgiveness is the right word. I don't forget what you did. I don't pretend it didn't happen. But I've released my need for you to suffer for it. I've let go of the poison. Not for you. For me. Because carrying hate was destroying me more than it was hurting you. That's probably the most honest answer anyone's ever given me. You asked for honesty. That's what our whole relationship is built on now. No more lies. No more pretending. I'm grateful for that. Even though the truth is hard, it's better than what we had before. What had they had before? A friendship built on unspoken resentments and unacknowledged competition. Brielle's unconscious superiority about her successful marriage. Valentina's hidden jealousy about everything Brielle had that she wanted. It had looked beautiful from the outside, but had been rotting from within. This new thing they had, whatever it was uglier, but more real. And somehow, that made it stronger. Hadley's first birthday had been a milestone in more ways than one. They'd thrown a small party. Just family. Brielle and Rowan. Fletcher and his new girlfriend, a pediatric nurse he'd met at the hospital who knew the whole complicated story and had chosen to get involved anyway. Valentina. Kennedy. A few of Valentina's mom friends from her support group. Watching Hadley smash her first birthday cake, her face covered in pink frosting, surrounded by this bizarre collection of people who all loved her, Brielle had felt something unexpected. Peace. This wasn't the family she'd imagined. This wasn't the motherhood she'd dreamed of. But it was real and it was hers, and it was built on truth instead of fantasy. After the guests left, after Hadley was bathed and put to bed, the core family had sat around Valentina's living room. Fletcher, Valentina, Brielle, and Rowan. For people connected by the most unlikely circumstances, trying to figure out how to raise one little girl together. I want to say something. Fletcher had cleared his throat nervously. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I need to say it. What I did, the affair, getting Valentina pregnant while married to Brie, it was the worst thing I've ever done. I destroyed people I loved because I was too cowardly to face my own pain. And I'm sorry. I know I've said that before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry to both of you. And I'm grateful that you've both been gracious enough to let me be part of Hadley's life despite everything. Valentina had nodded, her eyes shining with tears. I need to say something too. I spent years being jealous of Brielle, of her marriage, her success, even her grief because it made people care about her. And that jealousy made me do something unforgivable. I destroyed a friendship that meant everything to me because I couldn't get past my own insecurity. I'm sorry, Brie. I'm sorry for what I did and for all the years I pretended while feeling resentful underneath. Brielle had looked at these two people who had hurt her so profoundly, who had changed the trajectory of her entire life. And she'd recognized something important. They were just humans, flawed and broken and doing their best with their own damage. I'm not going to say it's okay. It's not okay, and it never will be. But I'm going to say that I see you both trying to be better. I see you both showing up for Hadley. And I appreciate that. We can't change what happened. We can only decide who we're going to be moving forward. Rowan had squeezed Brielle's hand. She'd been quiet through the whole exchange, but now she spoke. I just want to say, as the outsider in this group, that what you've all built here is remarkable. It's messy and complicated and probably shouldn't work. But you're all choosing to put Hadley first. You're all choosing honesty and growth over resentment and revenge. That's rare. That's special. The months had turned into a year, and then another. Hadley had grown from a baby into a toddler. Her first words had been Mama for Valentina and Brie for Brielle, which had made everyone cry. Her first steps had been toward Fletcher, which he'd recorded with shaking hands and tearful joy. She'd been surrounded by love. Unconventional, complicated love, but love nonetheless. Brielle and Rowan had moved in together when Hadley was 18 months old. A beautiful house with a yard where Hadley could play. They'd set up a room for her for the nights she stayed over, which were frequent. They'd become the stable, peaceful home base where Hadley came for Saturday morning pancakes and backyard adventures. Fletcher and his girlfriend had gotten engaged, and Brielle had surprised herself by being genuinely happy for him. His fiancée was kind and good with Hadley and seemed to understand the complex family dynamics without judgment. Valentina had started dating someone seriously, a divorced dad with 2 kids of his own who understood the complications of blended families. Someone who didn't care about her past mistakes, only about who she was trying to become. And through it all, the 4 of them, Brielle, Fletcher, Valentina, and Rowan, had maintained their unlikely alliance. For Hadley. Always for Hadley. Now, let me take you to a sunny afternoon 2 years after that devastating bridal shower. 2 years after the recording that changed everything. A park in Denver where an unlikely family had gathered to watch a little girl with dark hair and eyes take wobbly first steps on the grass. The day was perfect. Colorado blue sky, warm sun, the smell of fresh-cut grass, and someone grilling nearby. Hadley was almost 2.5 now, and she was fearless, running toward the playground equipment with the unsteady gait of a toddler who'd only been walking confidently for a few months. Brielle sat on a picnic blanket with Rowan, watching Hadley explore. Valentina was nearby, talking to Kennedy who had flown in for the weekend. Fletcher was pushing Hadley on the baby swings, his face lit up with the kind of joy that came from these simple moments. You look peaceful, Rowan observed, her hand finding Brielle's. I feel peaceful. For the first time in years, I actually feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. Not where you planned to be. No, definitely not what I planned. But maybe better. Maybe more real. Hadley had spotted Brielle and had come running over, arms outstretched. Brie, up. Brielle had scooped her up, breathing in that particular toddler smell of sunshine and graham crackers and innocence. Hadley had wrapped her arms around Brielle's neck and had planted a wet, sloppy kiss on her cheek. Love you, Brie. I love you too, sweet girl. So much. Valentina had walked over, smiling at the sight of her daughter cuddled against Brielle. Thank you. She'd said it quietly, so only Brielle could hear. For giving me a chance to make this right. For giving Hadley the village she deserves. Brielle had met Valentina's eyes. 2 years of therapy and honest conversations, and slowly rebuilt trust, had changed how they looked at each other. I didn't do it for you. I did it because I realized that family doesn't always look like what you planned. And sometimes the most beautiful things come from the most broken places. Hadley had squirmed down and had run back toward the playground. They'd all watched her, this little person who existed because of adult mistakes and complicated choices, who was surrounded by people who had hurt each other but had chosen to love her anyway. Can I ask you something? Valentina had said after a moment. Do you ever regret it? Choosing to be involved instead of walking away? Brielle had thought about the question, about all the complicated emotions of the past 2 years. The grief and healing, the divorce and new relationship, the unexpected path to a version of motherhood she'd never imagined. No, I don't regret it. It's been hard. It's been messier than anything I could have planned. But that little girl over there, she's taught me more about love than anything else in my life. Real love, the kind that doesn't require perfection or biology or traditional structures. Just showing up. Just choosing, every day, to be present and honest and committed. That's beautiful. It's true. Kennedy had joined them on the blanket, and the 3 women had sat together watching Hadley play. 3 women connected by blood and betrayal and the choice to build something new. You know what's crazy? Kennedy had said, 2 years ago, if someone had told me you 3 would be sitting together peacefully, co-parenting a child, I would have said they were insane. 2 years ago, I wanted to destroy both of you. Brielle had said it matter-of-factly. I had the power to do it. I had the recording, the evidence, the moral high ground. I could have ruined your lives. Why didn't you? Kennedy had asked, even though she knew the answer. Because destruction is easy. Building something from the wreckage is hard. And I was tired of easy answers. Fletcher had brought Hadley back to the blanket, and they'd all shared snacks from the cooler Rowan had packed. This strange family, eating goldfish crackers and apple slices while a toddler climbed over them like a jungle gym. At one point, Hadley had fallen and had skinned her knee. She'd cried those big, dramatic toddler tears, and she'd reached for Brielle first. Not her mother. Not her father. Brielle. And Brielle had scooped her up, kissed the tiny scrape, applied a character Band-Aid from her ever-present bag, and had dried those tears with practiced efficiency. All better, sweet girl. You're so brave. Hadley had snuggled against her for comfort, and Brielle had felt it again. That overwhelming love. That sense of completion she'd thought only biological children could bring. Later, as the sun started setting and they'd begun packing up, Valentina had pulled Brielle aside. I need to tell you something. Okay, I'm thinking about writing a book. About all of this. The affair, the pregnancy, the unlikely family we built. But I won't do it without your permission. It's your story too. Brielle had considered that. The idea of their private pain becoming public. The vulnerability of it. What would be the point of the book? To show other people that there's another way. That you can make terrible mistakes and still find redemption. That family can look different than we expect. That forgiveness isn't weakness, it's strength. If you write it, you have to tell the truth. All of it. How much you hurt me. How hard it's been. How this isn't a fairy tale with a happy ending. It's just real people doing hard work. I will. I promise. Then yes. You can write it. They'd hugged, and it had felt different than their hugs used to feel. Less performative. More genuine. Built on truth instead of pretense. The drive home with Rowan had been quiet and comfortable. The kind of silence that came from being with someone who knew you completely and loved you anyway. You were amazing today. Rowan had said as they'd pulled into their driveway. The way you are with Hadley, it's magical. You're the mother you always wanted to be. Just not in the way you expected. Is it weird that I'm grateful? For all of it? Even the betrayal? Why would that be weird? Because I spent so long hating Valentina and Fletcher for what they did. For taking something from me. But if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't have Hadley. I wouldn't have learned what I learned about myself. I might not have you. Gratitude and pain can coexist. You can be grateful for where you ended up while still acknowledging that the path was brutal. When did you get so wise? I've always been this wise. You just didn't notice because you were too busy being strong for everyone else. That night, tucked in bed next to Rowan, Brielle had thought about the recording. It was still saved on her phone, backed up in multiple places. She'd listened to it one more time, maybe 6 months ago. Heard Valentina's voice confessing the affair, planning the deception, dismissing Brielle's pain. It still hurt to hear it. Probably always would. But the sting was different now. Less sharp, more distant. Like an old scar that ached in certain weather but didn't actively bleed anymore. She'd pulled out her phone and had navigated to the file. Had hovered her thumb over the delete button. But she hadn't deleted it. Not because she wanted to hold it over anyone's head. But because it was a reminder of the day her life exploded. Of the choice she'd made to build instead of destroy. Of the journey that had brought her here. The recording had done what she'd needed it to do. It had forced truth into light. Had given Dane the information he deserved. Had catalyzed the transformation that everyone involved had needed. Now, what she'd done with it had shocked everyone. Understand. Not because this story isn't just about Brielle, but because she used it for redemption. It's about all of us. About the choices we make when we're hurt. About the kind of person we want to be in our darkest moments. Brielle could have destroyed them. She had every right, every justification. Society would have supported her, applauded her, validated her rage. But she chose differently. She chose to ask herself a hard question. What do I actually want here? Do I want revenge? Or do I want healing? Do I want to punish them? Or do I want to build something meaningful from the wreckage? And here's the truth that most people won't tell you. Forgiveness isn't about letting people off the hook. It's not about pretending the hurt didn't happen or that the betrayal doesn't matter. Forgiveness is releasing the poison you're carrying so it stops destroying you from the inside out. It's deciding that your peace matters more than their punishment. It's choosing to define your own future instead of letting their mistakes define it for you. Brielle forgave, but she didn't forget. She didn't reconcile the relationships to what they were before. She didn't pretend everything was fine. She built something new, something honest, something that acknowledged the pain while refusing to be consumed by it. And in doing so, she gave herself the greatest gift. Freedom. Freedom from bitterness. Freedom from the exhausting work of hatred. Freedom to love Hadley without reservation. Freedom to find love with Rowan. Freedom to become a version of herself she'd never imagined. If this story moved you, if it challenged you, if it made you think differently about forgiveness or family or what strength really looks like, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button. Not just because you enjoyed the story, but because someone else needs to hear this message about grace and redemption and the courage it takes to choose a different path. Share this video with someone who's struggling with betrayal. Someone who thinks revenge is the only option. Someone who needs to know there's another way. Subscribe to Mr. Hearthline Stories because I'm here to bring you stories that don't just entertain, they transform. Stories that challenge you to think differently about life and love and what really matters. And drop a comment telling me, what's the hardest thing you've ever forgiven? How did it change you? What would you have done in Brielle's situation? Let me know where you're watching from, or just say I'm with you, Mr. Hearthline. Because here's what Brielle learned, and what I hope you'll take from this story. The most powerful thing you can do isn't always the most obvious. Sometimes strength looks like softness. Sometimes wisdom looks like mercy. And sometimes the most beautiful families are built from the most broken pieces. Your story isn't over. The betrayals you've survived, the hurt you're carrying, the broken pieces of your life, they don't have to define your ending. You get to choose what you build from the wreckage. You can choose destruction, or you can choose creation. You can choose bitterness, or you can choose grace. You can choose to let the betrayal consume you, or you can choose to transform it into something meaningful. Brielle chose transformation. She chose to let her pain become purpose. She chose to build a family that didn't look like anything she'd imagined, but was more real than anything she'd planned. And in doing so, she became the hero of her own story. Not because she was perfect, not because she didn't struggle, not because the path was easy, but because she kept choosing every single day to be the person she wanted to be instead of the victim circumstances tried to make her. That recording, those 43 minutes of devastating betrayal, could have been a weapon. Instead, Brielle made it a tool for truth, for transformation, for building something beautiful from something broken. And now, 2 years later, she sits in a park watching a little girl play. A little girl who calls her Brie and reaches for her when she's hurt. A little girl who exists because of betrayal but is surrounded by redemptive love. She sits next to a woman who loves her without conditions, who supports her complicated choices, who understands that family can look 1,000 different ways and still be real. She co-parents with her ex-husband and the woman who betrayed her, and somehow they've made it work. Not perfectly, but honestly, with boundaries and therapy and the daily choice to put a child's well-being ahead of adult ego. Is it the life she planned? No. Is it the life she would have chosen if given the option? Probably not. But is it beautiful in its own messy, complicated, real way? Absolutely. And that's the final lesson of this story. Life doesn't always go according to plan. People will hurt you, betray you, destroy the future you thought you were building. And when that happens, you have a choice. You can spend your energy destroying them back, or you can spend that same energy building something new. Something honest. Something that reflects who you want to be instead of who they made you in your worst moment. Brielle chose to build. And in doing so, she didn't just change her own life. She changed Hadley's life, Valentina's life, Fletcher's life, even Dane's life, by showing him the truth before he committed to a lie. She became a catalyst for transformation instead of destruction. And the world is better for it. So I'll leave you with this question. What are you building? From your pain, from your betrayal, from your broken pieces, what are you choosing to create? This is Mr. Hearthline, reminding you that your story isn't over. It's just beginning. And the most powerful chapters are often the ones you write after everything falls apart. Choose grace. Choose truth. Choose to build something beautiful from the broken pieces. And remember, the most shocking thing you can do when someone betrays you isn't always revenge. Sometimes it's redemption. Sometimes it's showing them a better way. Sometimes it's becoming so committed to your own healing that you accidentally heal everyone around you. That's what Brielle did. And that's what shocked everyone. Not her anger, but her grace. Not her destruction, but her creation. Not her bitterness, but her ability to transform pain into purpose and betrayal into an unlikely, beautiful family. That recording changed everything, but not in the way anyone expected. And that, my friends, is the power of choosing differently. I'm with you, wherever you are in your journey, whatever pain you're carrying, whatever choice you're facing. I'm with you. Now go out there and build something beautiful.